Can't get higher. There's no loftier goal than to be a member, a rank-and-file member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm resentful at Nazis for slaughtering Jews. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. Now, resentment's no big deal. It's just the source of all spiritual illness, the great destroyer of all alcoholics. It'll cut me off from the sunlight of the Spirit, drag my ass out, and kill me dead. But don't be alarmed. No big deal. Because, you see, I don't just dislike stuff. I don't just dislike stuff. I re-experience this hatred. I hate so intensely that I wake up and I care for my hatred like a little flower. I water it. I care for it. I love my hatred. If I realize that I have forgotten to hate something, I'm shocked and dismayed of losing out on that hatred time. I have to redouble my hatred time to make up for the lost hatred time. I hate things in a way that eats my brain and my heart, turns my life black, eclipses anything good that's happening in my life, and throws me out of my own life. But relax, work a step a year, don't worry about it. You don't hear that pearl a lot anymore. I used to hear that a lot, a step a year. But I judge no man. What am I going to do? I look at the list of resentments. The first thing that was apparent was that the people in this world were often quite wrong. The book never argues with us. Never argues with us. You're right. You've been screwed. You've been screwed. When you go someplace, the people where you've been, they call the people you're going to go to, and they go, "Get him. He's coming. Get him." Because early on, people talked behind my back. Then they started doing things behind my back. And then they started thinking behind my back. And it's hard to catch them. But you can. You can. You have to accuse them of it constantly. And you'll get them eventually. And then on that page, right on page 66, you see, what it says is you're right and you're dead. You're right and you're dead. Because if you just didn't like this, you'd be fine. But unfortunately, you have a soul sickness that sets off a kind of thinking where all of a sudden it sinks below the horizon and you drink again. You go out for a pack of cigarettes. You wind up in Baltimore. You don't know how, which actually happened to me. And I have a strange mental twist. And as a result of the spiritual sickness, it gets set off, and I take a drink I cannot stop taking. How can I get out of this cycle of spree and remorse? My problems pile up at a seemingly unsolvable rate. Silkworth describes it so gorgeously. They pile up at a seemingly unsolvable rate. I have no way to encounter a power to help me out from under. The alcoholism is so efficient at producing anxiety and problems. The web becomes so impossible for me to solve on my own. Nothing can compete with it. The therapy can't compete with it. Drug therapies can barely, they can compete with it by making me unconscious. But I can't encounter anything. And all we're talking about is some spiritual tools that will help me encounter a power greater than myself that will get me out of the cycle of spree and remorse. And the minute I did it, for the first time, I started the cycle of surrender and commitment. Where I made a little surrender. I got on my knees. I said a prayer with another man. There was a little surrender that made a little commitment possible. And then a little commitment made a bigger surrender possible. And the surrender made as opposed to the cycle of spree and remorse, which is every spree created more guilt, all more remorse, and it became bigger. Hell became bigger and more inclusive. And the cycle of surrender and commitment is just as powerful. And looking up and down with these glasses is giving me an acid flashback. I just want to let you know. So, on page 66, it says, you're right, and you're dead. You're right and you're dead because you experienced this in a way that ends your life. And then, in the second paragraph, it points out something that's really beautiful to me. It's plain that life that includes deep resentment leads only to futility and happiness. Be able to deal with the situations and use the situations, time that could have been put to better use. So kind of what they're talking about is, for every 5 minutes I spend in resentment, it's 5 minutes I've squandered. 5 minutes I could have been doing something else, fishing, who the hell knows. And 5 minutes I've cut myself from the sunlight of the Spirit. So for every 5 minutes I spend in resentment, I'm wasting 15 minutes. And I want to tell you, I love that idea because it explains something huge to me. How many times have I been to AA meetings and have I heard people get up to podiums and say, I can't believe what I'm able to do in my life. I can't believe what I fit into a day. I did nothing. I could have gotten a job as a parachute bag. I mean, I did nothing. Absolutely useless, you know? And I'm like, I can't believe what's fitting into my life. And I want to tell you that's true for me, and that really explains it to me. For every 5 minutes I spent, I burnt 15. My life was exhausting, man. Absolutely exhausting. And it's not anymore. It's really not. In page 66, in the middle of the first paragraph, it says, sometimes it was remorse, then we restored ourselves. That's a resentment against myself. I know you don't have any, but I'm not as spiritually developed as you, and I've got a lot. So that's why I ask myself that question, do I have any resentments against myself in connection to this resentment? You know how a dentist will find a little pinprick, and he'll open it up, and it'll be like a theme park in there, you know, the little hole. There's a lot of decay in there. I have found that with resentment. Sometimes I'll write one, and the dominoes start falling. It'll open this little psychological theme park for me, you know. So in those two paragraphs, in the middle of 66, it says, you're right and you're dead. You experience this in a way that's killing you, that's wasting your time. Your life is evaporating. It's running out between your fingers like a handful of water. And then it says on the bottom of 66, so we're going to have to turn back to the list for it, holds the key to our future. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real. And I want to tell you, if I only had real events on my inventory, it would have been a pretty short document. Because I did a lot of mind reading. One of my defects of character is mind reading. As a group, we're the most pathetic group of mind readers I've ever met in my life. I mean, so many of my resentments are due to mind reading. Not good mind reading, but mind reading. And, I'm not good at it. Fancy to real had the power to actually kill. We saw these resentments must be mastered. We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. You know, it's a funny thing. Wish them away any more than alcohol. Sometimes, to me, a prayer is a wish. If it's not moored to specific action. Sometimes my prayers, I'm trying to wish them away, and I need to do an inventory. I need to take an action to make it vital. Some people pray for people who they're resentful at. It's mentioned in one of the stories in the big book, and I don't indict that at all. I know it works for a lot of people. Has never worked for me. My prayer usually winds up being, Pop, help this guy. Kill him. He needs killing. It'll be good for him. And it'll be good for everybody, I think. My sponsor used to say, just stop the prayer in the middle, you know. So it's never worked for me. I would try to will these things away, wish these things away, and I can't will them away just as I can't will away alcohol. And then on the top of 67 in the first paragraph, it says some pretty remarkable stuff. It says that this is a sick person. On page 65, actually page 64, it says something very important in the last paragraph. It says, we've not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. So if you're an alcoholic, you're spiritually sick. Okay? It's very clear about that. And on the top of 67, it says, if I'm resentful at someone who is spiritually sick. Now, how do I decide if I'm resentful at someone who's spiritually sick? My first sponsor gave me a really nice technique that I love to use. He said, Scott, odds are if they're one of the 5 A's, and I'm going to use a bad word, and I apologize already. He said, alcoholic, if they're one of the 5 A's, they're probably spiritually sick. Alcoholic, addict, Al-Anon, Alateen, teenage version, or asshole. And he said if you can't get him into the first 4, there's always a seat in the 5th category. And does that mean they are spiritually sick? I don't know. Fancy to real, it has the power to actually kill. But if someone is spiritually sick and I'm resentful at him, then one of my defects, it says on the top of 67, that I should be able to show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Now, I want to tell you something. For me, the opposite of resentment is not always peace, love, and happiness. The opposite of resentment might be the absence of murder. I might just not kill that person, but it doesn't mean I have to like him. It says then, on the following paragraph on 67, we cannot be helpful to all people, but we must at least take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Now, my aunt held my arms to my side so I could be hit. She was an extremely abusive woman. Do I like her? No. Do I hang out with her? No. Do I spend time with her? No. Do I resent her? No. Absolutely not. Was the resentment my fault? Absolutely. Now, a reasonable person would have simply not liked her and never let her be alone with my children, right? But I spent 19 years of my life character assassinating the woman, doing whatever I could do to make her miserable. If you said, I like her, I'd go, no, you don't. And I'm going to tell you why. So, the other thing I love, on the top of 67, it doesn't say pray for the other person. It actually says pray for yourself. It says, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, not to the other person and not to myself loud enough so that they can hear me. Just to myself. Just to myself. And I've had many people in Alcoholics Anonymous tell me that they were resentful at me. I don't know what book they're reading. I judge no man, but I never get it. I never get when somebody walks up to me and says, I've been very resentful at you. I always try to interrupt and say, this is not good information for me. This is not information I should have. If you want to discuss the problem, that's fine. But the book says really clearly, this is not, God save me from being angry, that will be done, not mine. This is not information that's going to be helpful or useful to me. So, in the third paragraph, to me, the entire world turns on the third paragraph on page 67. It's the way out. It's my road to freedom. It's the arch to which I will pass through. It's how am I possibly going to stop hating the Nazis? How am I possibly going to stop hating my aunt? How am I possibly going to stop hating myself for being loaded the night my old man died, for being a piece of crap as a father? You guys told me I wasn't bad getting good. You said I was sick getting well. Is that right? Yes. But I felt like a bad guy. And I'll tell you why. I acted like one just about all the time. So I had to start not acting that way in order to stop not feeling that way. And sometimes I've heard people in AA say, I don't want to get well. Well, I do. And the big book of AA tells me I can. In the 7th chapter it says, wife or no wife, job or no job, tell a man he can get well if he starts depending on a higher power. I don't want to get cured, but I do want to get well. And there's tremendous wellness in Alcoholics Anonymous. Those are the guys who I hang out with. So, here it is. Here it is. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrong that others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and were willing to set these matters straight. My world turns on this. Some people do a fourth column. Some people do a defective character list. Frankly, I couldn't possibly care less. There's a lot of talk about the fourth column. Whatever you're doing to get closer to God. I do a defective character list. And the reason why I like to do a separate one is when I go to God in 6 and 7, I'm going to take that list. I'm not taking the resentments. I'm asking God to remove the defects of character. So for every resentment I write number 1. I'm resentful at Nazis for slaughtering Jews. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. What are the defects of character in me that if God would remove, the resentment would be gone? When I originally wrote this on my 4th step, I had one defect of character. It was, I'm too much of a coward to kill them all. My sponsor took umbrage with this in his own very sweet, wonderful way. And we did some work on this, and my world turned. He said, the inventory is yours, not the other man. Okay? Now, it says on page 65, we write resentments against people, institutions, and principles. People I know. Institutions. The Nazi government is an institution. The government of South Africa is an institution. Homophobia is a principle. Racism is a principle. Anti-Semitism is a principle. Plenty of resentments there. Some people I sponsored a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. And I sponsored him for a couple of years, and this guy wound up calling me up and saying, what should I bring to your son's bar mitzvah? So, what is in me that if God would remove the resentment would be gone? Anytime I hear a German accent, I hate the person. I don't even think about it. I'm a bigot, and I'm a hypocrite. I'm an opportunist. Because I've used this to apply for self-pity and to be a little more special than other people. Opportunism, hypocrisy, Bigotry. Ugh. Not what I counted on. Not gallant. There's nothing gallant here. I don't write a little, read a little, write a little, read a little. I read the whole thing, so maybe I can be so crushed under the weight of it, so decimated, so deflated of ego at depth that I will actually be willing to try to stop treating my own alcoholism with a drink and trying to treat it with the program of action outlined in this book. An unbelievable thing. Unbelievable thing. It's a miracle. Self-pity. I want to tell you right now, you bottle self-pity, it'll knock crack off the market in 15 minutes. It's a better drug, more available. When I get filled with self-pity, I get a little lump in my throat. My eyes get watery. I lean forward. It's good stuff. And you know, it's funny, the different forms of self, it's been so important and helpful for me to be specific on my inventory. Selfishness, self-centeredness, and self-seeking are interesting. Selfishness is kind of wanting it all for me. Self-seeking is trying to figure out what's in it for me. And self-centered is figuring it's all about me. So they're the same, but they're a little different. And they got their own little English on the ball, you know. I like that. My family, before I get into my family, it says in the book that if I could accept the fact that they were spiritually sick like me, I would show them tolerance, pity, and patience. So obviously one of my defects of character has to be I am unwilling to accept the fact that the Nazis are children of God who could be spiritually sick like me. I thought my hand would fall from my body. Now, does that mean, what is the opposite? I'm resentful at my aunt for holding my arms to my side so I could be hit as a child. That affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. What are the defects of character in me? Blue skies, God's got a magic wand, He comes and touches me on the head. What is it in me today? I'm a hypocrite. I've been abusive to my children. I treated my children like crap. I'm a character assassin. I'm a grudge holder. I'm self-righteous. You know, I'm wrong, but you're wronger. Unwilling to accept the fact that my aunt is a child of God who could be spiritually sick. I'm not living in today. You know? I'm a bully. Because if you tell me you like her, I'm going to try to bully you into not liking her. Was the event my fault? Absolutely not. From my point of view, absolutely not. Was the resentment my fault? Every time, without exception, with no loopholes, every time. I'm resentful at myself for being loaded the night my father died. It affects everything. What are the defects of character? Not living in today, grudge holder, guilt, shame, low self-esteem, irresponsible, dishonest because I lied to everybody about it, didn't tell anybody about it. And you know what? There was some grandiosity there. I don't think I was able to write this at the time, but there was grandiosity there because I was the worst guy who ever lived, ever going to live, ever going to be on the planet. Nobody ever did what I did. And this was the key to my freedom, was to be able to start seeing this from a different point of view. And was I resentful at myself? Any resentments against myself in connection with the resentment against my aunt? Yeah, I was resentful at myself for putting her down and spending 19 years of my life trying to poison whatever waters this woman was in. So I really like that. I really like examining, do I have any resentments against myself in connection with this resentment? So I'm asked to write twice on the first section of the inventory. I'm asked to write 3 columns of resentment, and I'm asked to write a defect list. As a matter of fact, in the description of Step 5, in the first page of Chapter 6, there's an interesting rendering of the 5th step there. At the bottom of the first paragraph, it says, this requires action on our part, which when completed will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. It doesn't say of our wrongs, and I just like that because I can't tell anybody the exact nature of my defects unless I list them. That was on page 72. Okie dokie. Now, on the bottom of page 67, the very simple one-page section on the second section of the inventory begins, and it's about fear. I've heard a lot of wacky things about fear. I've heard things that make sense to me, and I've heard things that don't make sense to me. I've heard people say that you can't be in fear and faith at the same time. I have found this to be patently untrue, and it is nowhere in the Big Book of AA. Quite often I'm terrified, and I have a lot of faith that that'll end, because I've seen it end time and time again. I've seen it demonstrated in the lives of the people around me, and I've seen it in my own life. So a lot of times I'm frightened, and I have faith that I'm not going to be frightened. So I have not found those things to be mutually exclusive of each other at all. At all. I'm sure you guys have heard interesting things done with the abbreviations for fear, and I'll do none of them today. One of the things I really love is on the top of 68, it talks about self-reliance failing us. It says we put our fears down thoroughly, and we put them down on paper even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So, here's an interesting thing. If there had been a PR guy working on the writing of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the middle of the description of Step 9, it says that you will know freedom from fear of financial insecurity. Books written between 37 and 39. Global financial collapse, bedlam, people jumping off skyscrapers, terror in the street, people selling apples in the street, absolute misery. If there had been a PR guy, I'd go, don't tell them that. Promise them anything. Give them a Corvette, but don't promise them freedom from fear of financial insecurity. It doesn't make any sense. And they did it. They did it. They promised in those days the most unlikely thing you could possibly promise a human being. And they did it, and it paid off. And right now, we're in the middle of some unique, volcanic, catastrophic fear. And knowing that, but it means that I can continue to seek the way out, and I can take action, and I can do some stuff, which I'm going to talk about a little later on. It also says that I write down fears not in connection with personal resentment. That's what it says on the top of page 68. I take fears not in connection with personal resentment. What does that mean? Now, on a defective character list, I'm resentful at my boss for screaming at me. It affects everything with me. Probably, maybe it doesn't affect sex. What are my defects of character? One of my defects on that resentment is fear of financial insecurity. This guy, has this sort of Damocles over my head. I'm self-seeking, I'm self-righteous, I'm grandiose, all this other stuff, right? But it asks me on the fear list to write fears not in connection with personal resentment. I am frightened of police, but I'm resentful at myself for knocking over liquor stores. So there is definitely a resentment in connection with that fear. That's not a pure fear. Okay? I'm going to write the resentments against myself for knocking over liquor stores, and maybe fear will somehow get onto that defective character list. What are the pure fears that I experience, not in connection with personal resentment? I'm frightened of dying. I'm frightened of living. I'm frightened of AIDS. I'm frightened of anthrax. I'm frightened of being successful. I'm frightened of being a failure. I'm frightened of being alone. I'm frightened of being with people. Some life you could live, huh? I mean, really, if you take the interior of an initial fear list and take a look at it, a person can't live that way. You can't live in that landscape. The architecture of that kind of terror, it's impossible. It's like waking up and trying to walk through a wall of Jell-O every day. There's just absolutely no way to do it. And it's very interesting to me, if I stay honest about fears in connection with personal resentment, I'll start working on the fear list, and it'll wind up feeding my resentment list. And my resentment list will start feeding my fear list. It's really nice the way they play off of you. It's sort of like scrubbing the list. Taking a look and seeing what's setting off personal resentment and what's not. The third section of the inventory is about sex. I had to write about a lot of stuff when I did my initial house cleaning. I was resentful of myself for masturbating. There's nothing wrong with masturbating in my estimation. If you're masturbating until you're dehydrated, it might be a little problem. I had to try to get shape a sane and sound ideal for my future sex life and my future life. I love the sexual inventory so much because it's about the architecture of my life for me. In the second paragraph of page 69, the way I read it, I'm basically asked to write, I'm asked to write down who I've hurt, And I'm asked to write about 7 basic points. Where have I been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? That's 3. Where have I unjustifiably aroused jealousy, suspicion, and bitterness? That's 6. And here's the magic one. To me, it's as powerful as what we read on page 67, that paragraph where the world turned. What should I have done instead? Not what could I have done. What could I have done at the time? I could have dismounted when I realized the person was dead. That's what I could have done. That's what I was capable of doing. That's what I was capable of doing. Good news for the men I sponsor who are here today. What should I have done? I shouldn't have been in the neighborhood. I shouldn't have done anything. Not what could I have done. What could I have done? What I did. That's what I could have done. What should I have done? That's something vastly different. That's a completely different enterprise. And it's something very interesting on page 69. It then says, we got this all down on paper, which implies to me that it's not a list. We've pretty much been asked to write lists up to this point, more or less. This kind of implies that they'd like me to tell the story. Now, they don't care if the Chablis had a blush and it was a full moon. They just care that I write about how I did those 7 things. Where was I selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Unjustifiably aroused jealousy, suspicion, and bitterness. What should I have done instead? In this way, I try to shape a sound ideal for my future life. It says future sex life. I say sex life. I say my life. This is the kind of guy I want to be. What an incredible thing. Uncover, discover, and apply. No doctor ever gave me a shot and said, here's a bunch of gimmicks and some vaccine. Go shoot other people up. In my case, it would have been a particularly bad idea. But I was never asked to pass it on. And here I was told, that's all you got to do. If you've never heard an AA speaker named Sybil Corwin, I want to urge you, if it's possible, to get a hold of one of her tapes. She has, for me, the most powerful story of the 12th step. And when I was a newcomer in AA, it was the most appealing and compelling story that I heard. She was the first woman to sober up in Alcoholics Anonymous in Southern California. And when she came in as a result of reading the Jack Anderson article in the Saturday Evening Post. AALA, which had one meeting, a guy tried to branch off and start another meeting, and they said, we'll sue you. We're going to incorporate AA if you try to start another meeting. And this guy, who was Sybil's brother, said, that's like trying to incorporate the sunset, which I just love that. At any rate, they had just gotten the written responses, or some of the written responses to the Big Book of AA had come in to New York from people in L.A., and at her first couple of meetings, in her first couple of weeks of sobriety, the guy who was in charge there handed her a bunch of letters and said, this is from all the women in this area who have responded to the Big Book. Go talk to them. But don't tell them anything, because you don't know anything. So she started at the southernmost area, down in the South Bay, and would go to a house, knock on the door. Are you Evelyn? Yes, I'm Evelyn. I'm from AA. Would you like to go to a meeting? And that was her first service in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what her message is, and it's so gorgeous, is do it now. Do it right away. Just don't give away anything you don't have. If you got a car and a quarter, give someone a ride and lend them a nickel. If that's all you got. And what you don't have, give nothing. And what you do have, give as much as you possibly can. It's a tremendously, tremendously powerful thing. Right before I got sober, I had left my wife and kids for a woman. I was working down in Texas, and this is a person who I was working with down there. And so who was at the top of the page? Who was harmed? I put the people who were harmed at the top of the page. My wife, my children, this woman was hurt. The people I was working with were injured, and this woman's family were injured. Where was I selfish? I write something about it. Well, I wanted this woman, I wanted my wife, I wanted everything. I wanted everything at the same time. I didn't care about meeting certain deadlines at work because I was busy juggling all of this stuff. I write something about being selfish. Selfish, dishonest. I lied to myself about my intentions. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I lied to my employer about not being involved. And I write something about it. This is not yes and no stuff. Where was I dishonest? I lied to Nancy. I lied to the woman. I lied to my kids. And I talk about it. Selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate. I was inconsiderate to the woman. I was inconsiderate to the people I was working with because they were embroiled in all of this craziness and gossip and insanity. Our product was deeply affected by the fact that this was going on. Selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate, unjustifiably aroused. Jealousy, tremendous jealousy in my family, in her family, and jealousy at work because I was playing a favorite of her, creating jealousy in other people at work. And then, and this is something that was revealed to me in the writing of it, which really shook me up, I became jealous of people who I felt were living normal lives. It was like I was peering out through this little window of alcoholism. That's what would happen to me. The worst thing that would happen to me is like days like Halloween, like days where people were carrying on the business of life. You know, a number of years ago, I was driving to an AA function on Halloween to talk at this AA function, and it was one of those moments, if you've been around here any appreciable amount of time, odds are you've had them, when you are overcome with you get it. You just get it. It doesn't, you're struck, sometimes you'll drop to a knee and say thank you. It's incredible. And this was one of those moments for me. I'm driving to this thing, and I'm seeing that wonderful scene. You know the scene. Kids running through the street with bags of candy, and their capes streaming behind them, and leaves blowing, or it's L.A., so a leaf is blowing around, And I'm looking out through my windshield, and I was overcome. I just was almost knocked out by it. I felt part of it. I didn't feel like I was watching the thing. And I'll tell you why. Because for 16 years, I've spent a couple of bucks to have some candy at the house for the neighborhood kids when they come around. Because my sons, when they allowed me to buy costumes for them, they're costuming themselves these days, I got them the costume they wanted. I exercised the Halloween muscle based on having a resentment against myself for being a piece of crap as a father and never doing the right thing. My sons have received 16 appropriate birthday gifts on the day of their birthday. Not once in 16 years have they received the day after radioactive guilt gift from the only place they would take a hot check from me. Here's some drywall, boys. All the kids are loving drywall right now. It's Pokemon drywall. I've exercised the birthday muscle 16 times. I don't feel guilty on my kid's birthday. That's the kind of guy I want to be. Selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate, unjustifiably aroused. Jealousy, suspicion. I was suspicious. I created suspicion in both camps. I created suspicion at work. I created suspicion in myself. I started doubting my own sanity, and I write about that. I told one person I'd be there for Christmas. I didn't go there. I went to another place, and I write a little something about it. And bitterness. Well, that's the whole shooting match, isn't it? I became embittered with my own life. I wanted her. Why can't I have them? My kids are starting to feel nuts. They're trying to get ready for school. Things aren't in place. Everybody's disorganized. And the alcoholism just starts eroding. It just starts eating away at you. It's like standing on the beach and having the sand sucked out from underneath your feet over and over again. What should I have done instead? Now, it says in the big book of AA that we will not be the arbiter of anybody's sexual behavior. On page 69, Bill has this little thing, and I think he was addressing the kind of the people who were still pretty much hardline Oxfordites in Akron, and he had another camp in New York. It's New York. He has a lot of deranged, wacko people who are into therapy and art and doing a lot of stuff. So, they say have sex with everything. The Akronites say have to have a kid, and he says we don't want to be the arbiter of anybody's sexual behavior. And still, we see that go on in Alcoholics Anonymous. My home group is a men's stag where we've successfully created an atmosphere that gay and straight men are attending a meeting together and really committed to one another. And one of the reasons that we've been successful at it is sponsoring a great deal of gay men who could not attend the meetings I was going to, especially one which was kind of my home group, because remarks were being made from the podium in an offhanded way that were so injurious that it was almost impossible to feel part of. And it was made in a totally offhanded way. If these had been racial remarks or anti-Semitic remarks, they wouldn't have been tolerated for 1 minute. So we made a choice, which was the culture of our meeting and the tradition of our meeting. Every meeting has a tradition, that we wouldn't tolerate it. That if a guy did it, we would make it very clear to him in as kind and loving way as possible that he should never come back to the meeting again. Just kidding, just kidding. But we would make it very, very clear that this was the truth. This is not appropriate behavior for our meeting. Nothing wrong with it. We don't want to be the arbiter of anybody's behavior. And I want to tell you, it's really been a remarkable thing to be part of that fellowship. It's been an incredibly powerful thing for me. What should I have done instead? Some people might take a look at what I had done and approach it like maybe the original Acronites would have said, well, that's bad, that's adultery, that's one of the 10 Commandments, you should clearly have not done that. You should be having missionary-style sex with one person until you die. And so that would be their take on it. This was my take on it. My take on it was not that I never should have been there, not that I ever should have done it. My take on it was I either should have committed to my marriage or people get divorced, or committed to the other woman in the other relationship, but I never should have done both at the same time. I never should have lied. I should have been honest. I should have had open and honest conversations. I should have told the truth, and I shouldn't have done both at the same time. That's the kind of man I want to be. That's the kind of communication I want to have. Now, for another person, that might be a totally inappropriate thing to write, on either end of the scale. But this is about me finding a higher power that's going to break my cycle of spree and remorse, not you, not yours, So I did that sexual inventory, and I, thank God, didn't have to write about masturbation because I had not become dehydrated, and so there are the 3 sections of the inventory. I'm asked to write 4 times, twice on resentments, once on fears, and once on sex. I went and did step 5 with my sponsor for some bizarre reason. Believe me, I don't know where I got this idea. I thought that I was going to take my inventory over to his house and drop it off, and he was going to read it and then comment on it. And I got to tell you something, I do not know where I came up with this idea. I've heard the longest 5th step I've ever heard was 22 hours, and the shortest 5th step I've ever heard was 15 minutes. They're both drunk. Okay? And the reason why is that they didn't do anything after that. I personally could care less how long or short a person's inventory is. Sometimes guys ask me, how long should it be and how long should it take me? Well, right near the end of our book, on page 70, it says, if you've been thorough, you've written down a lot. I have no idea what a lot is for you. I mean, what's a lot for you it ain't a lot for me, and vice versa. How long should it take you? Well, as long as it takes to write down a lot, I guess. I don't know how long it would take you to write down a lot. So I really like that. I've sponsored guys who've been working on their inventories for 6 years. The suffering is unbelievable. It's like watching Exodus every time I talk to them. I mean, it's just like unbelievable, the agony. It's not my inventory, it's theirs. And then I sponsor guys who've done it in a couple of weeks, couple of months. I took 3 months to do it with mine. I have no idea what the right thing is for other guys and other gals. So I went and my sponsor told me I'd have to read it, and my heart fell because I had written like 225 resentments. I mean, I had written down a really tremendous amount, and I did not want to have to read this thing. And I had to. I read it. I read my fear list. I read my sexual inventory. And then he took me into the step, which is besides 1 and 2, there's less written on 6 and 7 than any 2 steps in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's said that they separate the boys from the men, the girls from the women, the raisins from the grapes. That there's a lot of separating going on there. And when we come back after lunch, I'm going to get into 6 and 7. I'm going to go into 10, and I'm going to talk about how I've used how 10 has presented itself to me in a way that is really continuing to change my life on a profound way. Before we break, for all of those who are bored, I want to tell you my favorite story about being bored in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then we'll break for lunch. Many years ago, there's a guy in my home group, this guy Jeff D., and he was brand new, and he was shifting around his seat at a meeting, and his sponsor said to him, "What's the matter?" And Jeff said, "I'm bored." And his sponsor said, well, you know why you're bored. Jeff said, no. The sponsor said, you're bored because you're boring. That's why you're bored. And it freaked him out. It was like an acid moment. He went, wow. It blew him away. And he thought, what a great thing to say to a newcomer. You know, it was really worked. So he could hardly wait till a newcomer told him that they were bored. 13 years later, no newcomer has told him that they're bored. He's at a meeting with a young lady at my old home group, the North Hollywood group in L.A., and there's a young lady there, she's new, and she's shifting around in her seat. And Jeff says, what's the matter? She says, I'm bored. He says, well, you know why you're bored. She said, yeah, because I'm with you. Why don't everybody stand for a second, hold hands, let's say the Serenity Prayer, and we'll hit the trough. My name's Scott Redmond. I'm an alcoholic. Well, we started this morning off with something annoying. Let's do something equally annoying right now. We're getting to know each other. Why don't everybody stand and try to hug somebody you don't know? Just try to hug somebody you don't know. Hey, break it up. Get a room. What the hell is going on here? It's bedlam. Okay, Ava. See Ava if you don't know. People were wandering around right here saying, I know everyone. There's nobody I can hug. So a quality problem. I go on sober vacations a lot, which I really like. And one of the things, the most entertaining things for me is to watch the first 3-4 days. I like to watch the New Yorkers try to relax, which is really funny because they like it. You watch them in the sun and they're like this. They're pissed off in paradise, you know, for a while. They're like, and watch it. It's like watching a penny on a frying pan. They just jiggle a little bit, you know, and I get a kick out of that. I want to do something kind of right away because they were here. A few questions which I want to talk about now. And I want to encourage you during the breaks, if you have any other questions, if there's something I'm not getting to, if there are questions other than why don't you die, please put it in the basket. This is a great question. It says, does the feeling of loneliness ever go away? I love the feeling. Hopefully in your case it won't go away. And I have found for me in Alcoholics Anonymous that the more I have done the inventory process, particularly the 10th step, the feeling of loneliness and being cut off from my fellows, it's exactly what I was talking about Halloween. It's exactly what I was talking about my kid's birthday. It's exactly, Alcoholics Anonymous is not a woo-woo thing. It's about being in the spiritual gym. It's about exercising those muscles. It's about doing the right thing, you know. And the more that I've done that, the less disconnected I've felt from my fellows. And steps 6 and 7 have really been that bridge to freedom. And I'm going to be talking about that first thing out of the gate. Someone writes that they have anger from being forced to do the Lord's Prayer and feeling untrue to myself. I'm going to say some stuff, and I want to start today, this afternoon session, the same way I started this morning's. Don't take anything I'm saying as an indictment of what you're doing. I have no idea how you have to bridge this gap between you and God. Okay? My wife won't say the Lord's Prayer. She will not say it at a meeting. It's a Christian prayer. We could debate about that. It's in the Gospels. It's either I think it's in Luke or Mark. It's one of the two. It's not in one Gospel and it is in another Gospel. So it's hard to say it's not Christian. I have no problem saying it. Funny enough that this came up today because the last thing I'm going to be talking about in the workshop today is the section on forgiveness and from the Lord's Prayer as presented by Emmett Fox, which is odd. I personally feel that it has no business in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Do I say it at meetings? Yeah, I do. I just do whatever I can do to count myself in. Is it good for me to be honest that it's a Christian prayer? Yes. It's very sane and very honest for me to do that. Do I think that people have to say it? Me personally, I don't. If one of my sponsees felt uncomfortable, I would suggest that he take an opportunity to do some prayer and meditation while other people are saying the Lord's Prayer. My wife simply won't say it. I know she takes that opportunity. My sponsor, who is I've had 3 sponsors in AA. The first one I had for 10 years who taught me the mechanics of everything I know in Alcoholics Anonymous. Extraordinary guy. And named Don. And my second sponsor was a guy named Paul O. A lot of people know him as Paul Oliger. Dr. Paul, his story is Dr. Alcoholic Addict in the book. And the reason why I mention that is because on the throwaway, because I assume that's what eventually you'll do with them, that was handed out. It was one of the last things he wrote, which was about sponsorship, which I really love. And I get an opportunity to, if you don't have one, should they see you? If you don't have one, see Ava during the break. And Paul passed away a bit over a year ago, and my present sponsor, Bob B. But at any rate, Paul used to do this thing during the Lord's Prayer, which was incredible, and I found myself too scared to do it. It was too intimidating. He always suggested, he said, don't close your eyes during the prayer. He said, look at the people around you. Look at them. Make some contacts. Try to see your higher power in someone else's eyes. And which made me go like this even more, because it's hard. It's embarrassing, It's like I always said, my wife and I would pray with a known felon, a puppy strangling felon, who I've just met in a public place. I'll pray for him, but pray with my wife, ooh, that's embarrassing. And I thought unnecessary. So without going on and on about it, that's my 2 cents about the Lord's Prayer. How do I deal with resentment when God is the first one on your list? I'm resentful at God. For what? I don't know. I mean, I've been resentful at God a couple of times for a couple of different things. And it's a really interesting thing to take a look at the defects of character that go in, that are the architecture of a resentment against God. I'm resentful at God for allowing Jews to be killed. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. What are the defects of character? Well, I had an incredible lesson in my life. I was in my first year of sobriety, and I was sponsoring some guys. I was kind of becoming a spiritual Goliath. And I had a ghostwriting job at 20th Century Fox, and a company made an overture to me to direct a situation comedy in L.A. And I thought that if I got this job directing the sitcom, it really would be good for the men I sponsor, because they'd see me prospering. It would be very good for them. So my brain blew up, and I didn't get the job, and I almost drank. And I went to my sponsor. I was humiliated. And he said to me, well, I guess you have the show business God. I said, what? He said, well, what keeps you sober? I said, God. He said, so God keeps you sober, and you didn't get a show business job, and you almost drank. So I guess you have the show business God, and he has abandoned you utterly. Now, when I came in AA, I heard God getting people jobs, God getting people into relationships, God getting people parking spaces. I said, oh, no, not the parking space, God, not the parking space, God. What if you don't get a space? And if you have a parking space, God, and he gives you space, pass it on. No. he said, you better sit down and write that 10-step. I was resentful at myself for not getting the job. I was resentful at myself for almost drinking, and I was resentful at the company for not giving me the job. And Don said to me, when you have a talk with your higher power, humbly ask him to remove these shortcomings. Humbly isn't take him if you can, big guy. Humbly isn't take him, you rotten. Humbly is, Pop, I can't bear this. Can you help me? I can't bear this. I can't bear doing this anymore. Can you help me? Can you enter my life the way you've entered my life with my drinking problem, and can you help me? Please. That's a relationship. I'm resentful at Scott for almost drinking. It affects, what are the defects? I'm ashamed. I'm ungrateful. I didn't drink. I'm a people pleaser. I have spiritual pride. I didn't get that until I came in AA and became a spiritual Goliath. How dare a man of my spiritual caliber comport himself thusly? It's hard to believe. And when I sat down and I went over these, I read it to my sponsor, I sat down and he said, you know what, you're going to have a talk with God about what you're going to have to do to stay sober. And I did 6 and 7 that day, and I said, you know what, I'm done with show business. You want show business? Take show business. I never have to do it again, ever in my life for a living. Take it. You do my work, I'll do your work. And within 3 months, I was working as a cook on a catering truck. And I looked up to God, and I said, I did not mean this. No way. We've had a grotesque misunderstanding. This didn't even come up in our original conversation about this. So in LA, when they make a movie, they hire a caterer to follow everybody around with a truck, and it's great money. It's Teamster dough. You're on a vehicle on a movie set. But I'm Scott Redman, right? My first movie I cater, the executive producer and star of the movie was a guy who I had worked with in the business. He sticks his head on the truck that morning and he says, "Can I have a burrito?" Scott? And I said, "What's happening, babe?" And he said, "Is this your truck?" I said, "No, but it's my spatula." And I went home and I called my sponsor and I said, "Oh, we're really getting the gift now. We're really, it's beautiful what's happening now. It's beautiful." He said, "Sounds like you've got a resentment." I'm resentful at Scott for working on the kitchen truck. It affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relations, and sex. What are the defects of character? I'm ungrateful. I'm working. I'm impatient. Things aren't going according. They're not moving. We got not enough movement here. I'm playing God. Things aren't going according to the Scott Redman program, a fabulous program. I'm irresponsible. I made a deal with God in 6 and 7. I'm not holding it up. I told him anything. Except this. Except this. Not this. And it's killing me. And I do that 10-step and I read it to my sponsor and I say, what can I do? I'm on deck. What can I do now? I can't just keep writing and doing the same stuff. I got to do something. I got to use this as a lever. And I'm coming back and I wind up serving people who had been my assistant directors and stage managers while I was directing shows. And when you're catering, the director screams at the first assistant screams at the second assistant says, "Where's the goddamn caterer?" Now I got a 15-year-old kid in my face, and I'm thinking, someday you'll walk in to meet your new boss. It's going to be me, and I'm going to make every breathing moment of your existence a living hell. And I'm writing. I'm writing about the kids. I'm writing about this. I'm coming back to my home group every week and telling them the freshest tale of personal humiliation. And the guys are going, ha, 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 ha. Great entertainment. On my inventory is a kid from the Bronx named Mark. I grew up with the kid my whole life. I went to kindergarten with the kid. The kid kicked my ass every day. He'd wake up and say, "Where's Redmond? Come and kick my ass." Humiliated me in front of girls at our first spin the bottle parties. He was the specter of loserdom in my life. The kid just kicked my ass and crushed me my whole life. There was 10 resentments on my inventory against him. This still was eating a hole in me. So, The last sitcom that I didn't get the job on, the sitcom and I almost drank that I told you about, one of the stars of that sitcom, I see him in a meeting. He's new. He sees me. He hears me speak. He comes to me and says, would you do me a favor? Would you help me out with this work? I say, thank you, Father. What a blessing. What an incredible opportunity. I can't believe I'm going to help. He comes to my house. He's a little late. He comes and he says, oh, I'm sorry I'm a little late. We're working a little late with our new director, Mark. "30 years later, he's back. Mark's back. And he's kicking my ass. He's got my job. And I just said, do you have anything else to do? Get a hobby! It was just, the architecture of it was so bizarre. All I could do was laugh. But you know what? I had done the inventory. I was free of Mark. I was happy, joyous, and free. I smiled an odd smile. I didn't have to tell this. I did wind up telling him many years later, because this guy did stay sober, how bizarre it was. I was working on the truck one day, and I continue. I'm resentful at Scott for working on this kitchen truck. I'm resentful at Scott for being a loser. I'm resentful. And you know what? My sons, who I was so damaged with, my sons didn't care about me being a writer and director. My younger son, Jesse, asked me to teach him how to cook. So we'd go to the market together and pick out what was fresh. And I taught him how to cook French food. And it's like we still cook today. 20 years later, that's what he and I do. That's what we love to do together. That wouldn't have been my idea. That wasn't my idea at all. And I'm catering this movie, and I look out, and the guy who had been the stage manager on the show that I didn't get, this guy Lenny, I look out, and there he is, and I went and hid behind the truck. And it was that time of the day. One of the jobs that you have, whether you're the chef, is you clean up the garbage at the end of the meal. So I'm at the real glorious part of the job. I'm schlepping the crap, So I got crap all over me. I see this guy, and I go behind the truck, and I hid. And it just happened to me. One more time, like it happened to me that day driving on Halloween, the voice said, you will either go do your job or you will hide behind this truck for the rest of your life. You'll either be behind this truck for the rest of your life, or you're going to go and you're going to give them a dime for their nickel, because that's the contract you signed. And I did it. I didn't want to do it. It felt like I was killing part of me. And you know what? I was killing part of me. A bad part of me. And I went out and I started cleaning. Lenny saw me. He came over. I wiped my hand. I shook his hand. I told him how great it was to see him. He told me how great it was to see me. And I moved on with the business of life. And I know that when I walked out from behind that truck, I turned that moment. I turned those resentments. I responded to my spiritual task, and my spiritual task is to address those defects of character, leverage them with my relationship with God, and find the kind of action that's going to lead to me being free. Because I can't hide behind the truck anymore. I can't hide behind that truck and stay sober. Not the last paragraph in chapter 3 says, the time and place will come where you will have no mental defense against the next drink, the first drink. It'll be 2 o'clock in the morning, your back's to the wall, and the wall's on fire. You surrender like Custer. All your men are dead, your gun's empty, your horse just died, there's 4 arrows coming at your head, and you go, okay, I give up. And it's a funny thing. One of the gifts of the 10th step to me has been, sometimes you hear people say pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. I disagree with that. I think pain is a touchstone of spiritual growth, not the touchstone of spiritual growth. Right now, at this point in my life, I quite often find that joy is the touchstone of spiritual growth. I love this thing. I want more. The people I hang out with are enthusiastic, involved people who are doing more, who want to be on the broad highway. So I'm not saying it's not a touchstone of spiritual growth. For me, it's not the. And I kept cooking. I kept doing it. I kept showing them giving them a dime for their nickel and showing up. And I had been cooking for about 3 years. And I got an overture made to me by a company called Ketchum Public Relations for this big-time comedy writing job. And I thought by this time, I'd been doing it for 3 years, I was sponsoring a lot of guys. I'm really kind of a spiritual behemoth by this time. And I figured now, if you think about it, and I like everybody just to think about me for a minute here, now the men I sponsor are really going to prosper from me getting this job because they'll see me having suffered, and now they'll see me prosper thusly. So my brain blows up before I even find out about the job. I mean, I go Yosemite Sam completely before I even get it, right? And I surrender it. I write about it. I read it to my sponsor. I surrender it. I get a call from Ketchum Public Relations. You don't have the job. I'm cool with it. I've already done the work. A little while later, I get a call from my catering company. Please go to Lake Arrowhead in the mountains above L.A. and cater some commercials up there. So I get in the truck, drive up to Arrowhead, and I grab the call sheet, which gives you all the information about the commercial. And I see that the commercials are for Ketchum Public Relations. I'm feeding them now. Now I'm feeding them. And I look down at the end of the truck, and there's a guy videotaping me. I said, what are you doing? He says, we're taping the making of the commercial. He's taping my humiliation. He's taping my humiliation. He's going to go back to New York. They're going to see the tape. They're going to go, is that Scott Redmond with the meatloaf? That's unbelievable. That poor son of a bitch. I go home. I call my sponsor. I said, yeah, we're really getting the gift now. It's overwhelming, this gift of sobriety. It's a miracle. It's wonderful. And and he says to me, you know, I guess God had enough writers and he needed a few cooks today. And then he said, you know, you asked God to work, you wanted to work for Ketchum, and you forgot to tell him what you wanted to do. I had to get a God big enough so that a lot of things could happen in his world, and I didn't get to drink. I couldn't have the parking space God. I couldn't have the show business God. I can't have, you know, like that woman who said to me that God probably felt I had a few lessons to learn. I don't have an earthquake God. God is God. Earthquakes are geology. It's very, very clear to me. I am convinced, and this is powerfully brought home by the events in the last few weeks and the deep wounds that we're all experiencing and are profoundly experienced in New York, that you can take any word in the Bible, in the Quran, and in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I've seen it done, and prove any point you want to prove. You can use the spiritual tools and use them as spiritual weapons anywhere you want. And I've seen it no less in AA than I've seen it any place else. I've seen people come up with stuff that is just, you go, just really will shake you up. But again, I judge no man because I'm too spiritually developed. So for me, it's been a very, very interesting thing to write down the resentments against God, examine the defects of character, and throw myself into working on these defects of character. And when I say working on them, I don't mean a frontal assault. Alcoholism really reacts poorly to a frontal assault. It really doesn't. When anybody says I'm working on myself, I always go, oh boy, don't. I can't, I'm bad at working on myself. I gotta help you in order to be helped. Please, you know, grant me forgiveness. Please, Father, please forgive me. I can't forgive myself. I can't be the source of forgiveness. In the Lord's Prayer, I'm asking God for forgiveness so I can forgive other people. I'm going to forgive other people like you're forgiving me. That's like putting myself on my 8-step list. For some people, it is the right and correct thing to do. For me, it was a disaster. I couldn't put myself on my 8-step list. I had to be as far from my 8-step list as possible. I sponsor men who put themselves on their 8-step list because they need to be there. I needed to not be there. Because I'm granted this unbelievable gift in the middle of the 9th step, and I know a new peace, a new freedom, a new happiness. Freedom from fear of financial security. I'll be able to deal with situations used to baffle me. This whole suite of value-added services, as they would say in my business, of that I get if I do this, if I work step 9. So that's my answer to that question. Boy, that was a long answer. Man. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you have other questions, it's really, it's great, and I'd love it. So during the talk, please bop them in there. On 6 and 7, there is very little written. And if you go to page 75, the bottom paragraph, returning home, we find, this is after you've done your 5th step. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove all of these from us all, the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Then ready, we say something like this. Will everybody please take the 7th step with me today, okay? My Creator. Now that you've taken 6 and 7, I want you to take a 2-minute break, because if I don't pee, I'm going to die. Me do precisely that. He had me go home, spend an hour, go over the stuff, had me say that prayer. I said the prayer, I gave it some thought. And I want to tell you something for me. 6 and 7 are very much like 1, 2, and 3. I took 1, 2, and 3 on whatever level I took them on when I took them on. It wasn't a very deep level at first. I personally found that my appreciation of 1, 2, and 3 has gotten deeper and bigger and broader and more inclusive the more I've moved on with the work. I mean, how could I really appreciate how unmanageable I was until I did an inventory? How could I possibly really imagine how much I needed to be restored to sanity until I saw the architecture of my alcoholism? How could I truly appreciate 1 and 2 and how awful it was until I went out to my fellows and made amends? And the amends process was not a simple thing for me. There were people that were dead. There were people who wouldn't talk to me. There were people who, my kids and my wife, for whom saying I'm sorry would have been very inappropriate. Gee, hun, sorry about this 8-year journey to Hades. Okay? I couldn't even get the words out of my mouth. I'm sorry were the 2 most useless words in my vocabulary. It was like having a mouthful of ashes. I couldn't stand hearing myself say it anymore. So I went through the defects of character, and I had a talk with God about them. And I went through them. Some people put them all in one place, kind of take all of the defects from all the resentments and make a master list. Some people go through each one. The thing I try to do with my inventory as much as I can is to keep it from becoming mechanical. I don't type mine. Some people type them because it's not a problem for them. It is a problem for me. It starts becoming mechanical if I type it. When I say I am unwilling to accept the fact that my wife is another child of God who could be spiritually sick like me, I like to say the whole defect out and use the person's name. The only time it's different is when I write it about myself. I am unwilling to accept the fact that Scott's another child of God who is spiritually sick. Not maybe, is. The only one I'm positive of is me. You might be. I'm trying to stop playing God with varying degrees of success and failure. So that's what I do with the defects. And then if I go back and do 6 and 7 on fears, I go back to page 68, and on the bottom of the 3rd paragraph, it says, we ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once we commence to outgrow fear. If I go one paragraph up, the bottom of the second paragraph says, we are in the world to play the role he assigns, just to the extent that we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely on us, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity. So, Father, please remove this terrible fear, turn my attention to what you would have me be. That's what it says on that third paragraph. And then in the paragraph above it says, and humbly rely upon him. Because if I humbly rely upon him, he will enable me to match calamity with serenity. So, what does that mean for me? Let's go back to my fear list. I'm frightened of animals. I was an animal abuser. Something I'm not proud of. I will tell you I have not abused an animal since the day that I got sober. But what came out in my inventory is I was scared of him. I felt responsible for the death of our family pet. The shame and guilt and terror that I experienced over this is undescribable. And I had those resentments on my inventory. But the thing that came out in my fear list is I was scared of them. I was scared of animals. Father, please remove this terrible fear of animals. Turn my attention to what you would have me be, which means what do you want me to do? My plan is to be scared. That's the Scott Redmond program. Be scared. Be scared, counterphobic, and attack. That's the Scott Redmond program. Or repress. I'm fine with either one. God's got another plan. Sometimes you hear people in the program say a lot about walking through fear. I understand that, but that's not always the answer. Father, please turn my attention to what you would have me be. In other words, what do you want me to do instead of being scared? Please remove this terrible fear of animals. Turn my attention to what you would have me be. And my inner voice said, stay away from them. Stay away from animals. And I said, okay, I humbly rely upon you, which means I'm going to go now do it. Otherwise, I'm just asking, I'm getting, and I'm going, what else you got? Because I'm not particularly fond of that. So I stayed away from animals, and in my 10th year of sobriety, I was at an AA conference where there was this gorgeous puppy that ran after me and ran into my lap, and I fell in love with him, and I knew that it was gone. It wasn't an event. It just happened. It was a war of attrition. It got starved out by my spiritual work. So the answer isn't always to walk through it in some kind of Arnold Schwarzeneggerish kind of attitude of, oh, well, I'm scared, so I'll buy fish, I'll pet a puppy, I could have wasted a lot of time. The inner voice said, stay away from them. What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful message. It didn't say, stay away from them, you schmuck. It just said, stay away from them. And I did. And it got eaten up. The fear got eaten up by the right action. I'm scared of dying. Please remove this fear of dying. Turn my attention to what you would have me be. I don't know what your God's going to say to you. Maybe your God's going to say, be in today. Maybe your God's going to say, get a checkup. Maybe your God's going to... I don't know what your God's going to say. But if you're not asking, most importantly, you don't know what your God's going to say. So that's the 6 and 7 I was taught to do on fear. The 6 and 7 I was taught to do on sex is in the last two paragraphs on page 69. Just above it, it says, where were we for? What should we have done instead? We got this all done on paper and looked at it. Once a guy is finished with his fifth step, I'll quite often tell him to go through your sexual inventory and take all the things you should be doing instead. All the time you wrote what I should be doing instead, and put them on one piece of paper. And that's the architecture of the man you'd like to be. That's the architecture of the person that you'd like to be now. What a beautiful thing. That's your ideal. Why not work toward that? And then it says, what a powerful message. In this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. I usually say sex life or just life. We subjected each relation to the test, was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem in meditation. We ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if I want it, not if I like it. If I want it. Because sometimes I'll say, Pop, what should I do? I get a message. I go, nah.